Minister DeBola, welcome. Congratulations. You are the first person to appear on the Niagara University of Ontario podcast, and we're absolutely delighted to have you.
So it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, and wonderful, and thank you for all that you do. I'm fascinated by your life, your work, and the conversations we've had previously, just from a point of view of your commitment to humanity and the work that you've done. Can you speak about the early influences in your life and what shaped you in terms of the path that you have been set on?
Well, I'm the firstborn to immigrants from Italy. My father came here in the late 50s and went back to Italy, met my mom. They got married, they came to Canada, and I was born here. I've always grown up in a community and in a family that was very close, shared many, many meals together. My father was a very hard worker. And I think the inspiration for me to work as hard as I did was I didn't want to work as hard as him. But we work in different ways. He worked physically because I think he made it to grade 3. And then when he was a young man, he was in the military. He went to war, spent 3 years as a prisoner of war. Eventually, like I said, came to Canada and started with very humble beginnings. You know, the proverbial cardboard suitcase story that I think I share probably with most of the people that had parents that immigrated here back in the late 50s and 60s. Grew up in Little Italy, started off there and eventually moved north, as my mother said, to Lawrence and Dufferin. And that was as far as my father could persuade her to go. From there, I managed to start high school. I went to a Catholic grade school, eventually to St. Mike's at college in Bathurst. I actually got accepted to the choir school, but I wasn't allowed to go there because in those days, to get to the choir school was almost 2 hours. And for someone in grade 4 on a bus by themselves, it was a little difficult. And so I eventually went to St. Mike's. And from St. Mike's, went to U of T, and then from U of T to University of Windsor for law school, and Harvard eventually to do some courses in negotiations and mediation, things that didn't exist in those days that are very important today. All along, I've always had friends that are priests that guided my way. Spent some time in Gethsemane in Trappist, Kentucky. Was intrigued by the life of Thomas Merton. And spent some time with Brother Patrick Hart. By that point, Thomas Merton had passed away. And I enjoyed that, but it wasn't, I guess, my future or my destiny. But it's funny how your life kind of circles around, because came back to Toronto, met my wife, got married, wanted to pursue my master's degree in law at Harvard, and was given an ultimatum: either we have a family or you're a student the rest of your life. So we started a family, and we have 3 kids. 2 of them are lawyers. 1 is in medical school, and the 3rd one. And I find myself, I went back to school. I did do my doctorate in clinical psychology, different than law, but very related. Decided that with the work that I was doing led me to Caritas, to a residential therapeutic community that had been started by a priest. Started working with men with addictions, and that led me to do the doctorate, and eventually make the transition to becoming a politician. And I asked for absolution from Father Carparelli back then for the transfer to becoming a politician. I've enjoyed that. I'm 7 years now. I was the Solicitor General in the province in my first portfolio, which eventually I became the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport. And then after that, the need was there just before COVID hit to establish a ministry for mental health and addictions. And I became the first minister in North America to have that portfolio.
Congratulations. Yeah.
And then from there, this February past, I was appointed to the Attorney General's office, and now look at mental health and addictions not from the healthcare standpoint, but from the justice standpoint and how it impacts, our justice system and our correction systems.
That's great. I know you're familiar with this language because of your life work, and growing up Catholic and going to Catholic school historically people have talked about vocations and callings as part of the life of a priest or a religious, so to say. But could you talk about your calling?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do a lot of talks with different groups, nurses, firefighters, police officers, corrections officers, social workers. And every time I meet with them, I listen to them speak, and none of them speak in terms of punching a clock and doing their jobs because they don't see their work as jobs. They see them as vocations. So vocations extends well beyond just clerics and the clergy. It really is, in many ways, the basis of why a lot of people go to work. It's not about the money, it's about the work that they're doing and the satisfaction they get from what they do. I kind of realized that a long time ago. When I started practicing law, I realized that justice was something that seemed to be more accessible to people that could afford it than for people that couldn't. And when I was in law school, I was the editor of something called the Canadian Community Law Journal, where we brought the language down to the point that anyone could read it and understand what their rights were. So going back as far, even before then, when I was in high school, I always worked with groups and individuals that were looking or that needed help, and tried to give them a better sense of living a wholesome life. So when the time came to become a politician, I really didn't want to be a politician. I wanted to be a change maker. I wanted to transform the systems that I knew were failing. And so I don't see the work that I do as a job. I see it as a vocation.
Yeah.
In doing my work, I try to always focus on doing what is best with as much data as possible to support the decisions that are being made, so that it's not emotional. It's based on data that's been collected over time, studies that have been conducted, and where they don't exist, I love doing pilot projects and trying to get to the best level of service, the most efficient way of doing things.
Yeah. One of the things I was struck by when I was first ordained a priest, I was assigned for the summer to help at a hospital in Boston as a chaplain to fill in. And there was a nurse there on the intensive care floor. And when people come into intensive care, it's a whirlwind. And so, in many respects, this was a floor filled with a lot of people from poor, lower economic, middle class communities in South Boston and in the States. And so, one of the things that was striking about this nurse to me was how great she was both with the people. She would just take them where they were, incredibly attentive to them. And she had great facility. This was going back to 1990, the machines on the floor, which have gotten ever more complicated. But the way in which she was able to navigate both of those worlds. And so, I would have lunch at various points in the hospital with some of the nurses and the staff and the doctors. And I said to her one day, I said, Marilyn, I just have to tell you how incredibly impressed I am with both the way in which you respond to the people who are here. And she would answer every question that families had. And, they were scared and, what's going to happen to my loved one. And, and she was great with the patients. And then she said, you just have such incredible facility with all the machines. And, and she said, she gave me an answer I never forgot. And she said, it's my calling. I'm a nurse. I love nursing, and it gives me a way to respond to the needs of the world that are put in front of me. And when I think about our conversations and I see your work and, what you've done and committed to in terms of mental health. And, it's a constant uphill fight, right? In terms of just the struggles and the challenges. But it seems to me in many respects that that's kind of the sweet spot of your calling, that you have found a way to be sort of a spotlight around mental health, its challenges, but also proposing ways in which there are solutions here, there's opportunities here. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because I've never seen the work that I do as work. If it was work, I wouldn't do it because it means that you have to put effort into it. And I think when I say that, I mean that God gives us gifts. And I remember as a young boy, when I was at St. Mike's, one of the priests used to say all the time, God's given you gifts, but the gifts aren't for you to make your life better. Those gifts, you have to discover what they are, and you have to use those gifts to make other people's lives better. And if you do, and you make other people's lives better, your life will be better. And it's interesting because the greatest rewards for me are not the monetary rewards that I've made as a lawyer. They've been how I've helped change people's lives.
Yeah.
The people that I lifted from the ground that were addicted, that were able to pull their lives back together and get married and have families and buy a house and just have that normalcy in their lives again. The times that I've helped, and again, I could remember as a kid, because most of the Italians that were on College Street, now that I think about it, didn't read or write English. And they would come from Italy and they'd be looking for work. And so I spoke English at 5, and I would take them around to different places and say, he needs a job. Can you give him a job? Can you help him? So it's always been, I guess, part of the work that I do and how I do it. But I think, again, it goes back to it's me having to figure out, and that's probably what we all have to do with our lives, figure out what it is that God gave us as a gift and how can we use that gift to improve other people's lives. And when we figure that piece out, life is really good. Because again, you're driven to do the things that are not for yourself. It's nice to have nice things. It's nice to go to, nice places. But it feels much more satisfying to actually know that you're making a difference in someone's life. So my life, every time I was challenged with something, if someone said to me, if you could help that person, but I didn't speak the language, I learned the language.
Yeah.
And I got up to 5, and I'm studying Hungarian now, only because of a comment that the Pope Francis made.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you heard that. He was in Hungary, in Budapest, and he was talking to the president, the former president, who was a friend of mine, and he said, the language in heaven is Hungarian. And so she said, why would it be Hungarian? He says, because it takes an eternity to learn it. So, I thought, what, that's a challenge. I'm going to take him up on that and see how long it'll take me to learn Hungarian. But it's one of the reasons why my languages have developed the way they have. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology because a minister told me, my information anecdotally is excellent, and you're very passionate about the subject, but you don't have any formal training in psychology. So I went back and did my doctorate, spent 5 years and completed it while I was a minister. And it comes to me easily, and it comes to me easily not because I work really hard, it's because I'm passionate about what I do, and it comes to me because it's God's will that these things, these tools I need to be able to do more of the work that I do.
That's great. And I know we've talked about it, and you're also passionate about how mental health can touch people across cultures and languages. Can you speak about how you think about the facility of creating that facility for people to respond across cultures and actually see culture as a positive in building a strengths perspective for people?
So when I started studying psychology, I realized that psychology was invented in the United States, Canada, and England. And all of those societies are individualistic societies. It's centered on the individual. I come from a collectivist worldview, being Italian, and the Chinese, and the South Asians. And the list goes on and on and on. I think there are actually more collectivist societies than there are individualistic societies. So I thought that it was kind of interesting that we were using psychology to try to help everyone, thinking that a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work. And it doesn't, because being of Italian origin, we don't talk about someone having a mental health issue or feeling depressed. You feel depressed, here's a shovel, there's the wheelbarrow, fill it with dirt and move it over there. And that's how you handle mental health. And if you take a little bit too long, you'd experience the consequences of that, which was usually the back of someone's hand. That was psychology for the Italians, especially the early Italians. So you've got to understand that as a background. Or, Chinese people will go in to see a doctor and complain about stomach aches and headaches. And those are somatic expressions of an underlying mental health issue. And if you don't know that and you misdiagnose it, you could be medicating someone that doesn't need to be medicated. So psychology has to evolve. We need to understand, the worldview of the individuals we're trying to work with. And that isn't only restricted to psychology, it's everything we do in our lives. Every contact we have, whether you're a doctor, a priest, a nun, a lawyer, if you are trying to provide someone with supports and services, you have to be able to step into their shoes and look at it from their perspective and how they see things. You can't understand anxiety or depression if you haven't experienced it. And to experience it in the form that the individual has it, you need to understand that culture, the background. We have people that have historical trauma in their lives. We have people that have, and it's intergenerational. We have people that use different styles of how their social network is formed. So you need to understand all those issues to deliver the appropriate services. So one of the things that I've spent a lot of time doing is learning different cultures, spending time, with different groups, trying to understand life from their perspective. And that's really helped me a lot as a lawyer when I was practicing. It's helped me a lot as a minister because, again, when you develop policies, they should be developed to meet the needs of the individual, not to try to do one size fits all.
Yeah. We've talked recently about, in recent years, your travels to India. And I had the opportunity to visit India 3 times in the last 3 years for NAGRA recruiting for both Ontario and for the campus in the United States. I'm just wondering about, is there any gleaning insights that you have of it's such an interesting, fascinating place that you've learned in terms of mental health and what people bring to that kind of a perspective.
Yeah, India is a very interesting place, and there are things that are done there that we would consider in the West to be almost like witchcraft or something that doesn't. But when you stop and think about Ayush, so that's Ayurvedic medicine, meditation, and yoga. When you look at Chinese traditional medicine, acupuncture, when you look at these different systems that have been around for thousands and thousands of years, it always causes me, and I think that's one of the experiences my travels have shown me, what is the primary purpose of having a system, and how is that system benefiting the individuals? So in a place like India, I sat with a group of doctors that were trained in the West and a group of doctors that were Ayurvedic doctors. And I'd hear the medical doctors say, well, we do hip replacements starting at 65, 70 years old. And then I'd hear the Ayurvedic doctors say, well, I can maintain the threshold of pain to a lower level till that individual is 80, and I can reduce the need for an intervention. I mean, we're doing hip replacements now and knee replacements on 60-year-old people.
Yeah.
And in India, using Ayurvedic medicine, they're extending the individual's life without those interventions. Now, it may not seem like it's that important, but it's important on a couple of different fronts. One, the list of people waiting for knee and hip replacements in Ontario is staggering.
Yeah.
So you've got the delay and the person having to live with that pain. And then the other thing is that usually that type of surgery will have to be repeated an additional time later on in that person's life. It's not forever.
Yeah.
So the fact that the person has to go through it. So if we can find ways to prevent or educate individuals on how to live their lives in a much more wholesome way, and leave those acute cases to later on. So it's not a question of replacing Western medicine with what they do in the East. It's a question of seeing how do they complement each other, and how can we build systems that reduce the need for individuals to have to get that kind of acute care that seems to be becoming more and more prevalent in our society. So for me, that's one of the things that I've learned from travel. It's also caused me to look at our systems. Example, policing in Portugal, most of the police officers there are teachers. And I thought to myself, well, wait a second, why aren't they, shouldn't they be enforcing the law? And why are they spending time educating? Why are they playing basketball with kids? Why are they walking through the malls? Why are they sitting on buses instead of, being in police cars chasing bad guys? Well, the thing is, if you address the issue upstream and you provide those resources as educational and prevention tools as opposed to enforcement tools, it starts to shift. And again, it begs the question, why do we have policing? And we know, our experiences in Ontario tell us, you cannot enforce your way out of criminality. You've got to look at the underlying causes of criminality and address them there. And then you build a system that the bad guys can get caught, can be prosecuted, and can be detained, and hopefully rehabilitated, because that's what those systems were built to do. But when you don't have those as your foundational principles, because we've allowed the systems to skew away from where they should be, you start realizing that the systems are broken and they need to be fixed. And so education and jurisdictional scans of processes that are being used in other parts of the world where perhaps they've learned the lessons is really helpful in developing policy for us in Ontario.
Yeah. One of the things I've heard you speak about is that, a solution-based approach in building these systems that are interconnected is really being able to go back to what was the original intent of the system, and that, just humanly, we tend to lose our way as we build more bureaucracy or, right? And can you speak about that
that basically is the principle of fidelity. If you start off and you build a system, and this goes for the operation of a hospital, it goes for the operation of a school board or a school, it goes to the structure that you even have in policing or in corrections, healthcare. All of them are systems that were started with principles as to why we need these systems. And these systems, in most cases, are to prevent and to educate. And so if your primary mandate in all of those is prevention and education, the first question you should ask yourself, if you're looking at healthcare, what do we do to prevent and educate individuals? And our system has defaulted to a hospital-centric system that if you've got a cold or you've got a cut or you've got a fever, you go to the hospital. We haven't built, or we've gotten away from the primary mandate or purpose of why that system was built. And a lot of change that I have been instrumental in creating as it relates to mental health and addictions is to try to take those away from the hospital emergency rooms. They don't belong there. They don't have the training, they don't have the time, nor the capacity to handle those types of cases. Yeah. And yet, 30 to 40% of the cases going to the hospitals now are mental health and addiction related. So the system needs to be examined, and we almost need to do a course correction, a transformation, a systems change, and to see what we can do to put those services back into the community. Look at policing. Policing, the primary mandate under the Police Act is prevention and education. How many police officers have the time to do either of that? They're busy chasing bad guys. And when they're busy chasing bad guys, the other two functions fall behind. Yeah. And when they fall behind, we start seeing issues. And I listen to the parents when they're complaining that we're introducing police officers back into the classroom. And I stop and think to myself, is it really the parents' fault they're complaining about this? Because we've allowed the system to become so different than what it was supposed to be for, that they identify police officers as enforcers. And so I do not want someone with a gun in my kid's classroom, because this is a safe space, and you've just created a situation where that space is not safe for that child anymore, where the primary purpose was education and prevention, right? And if that was still the case, the parents wouldn't be so quick to say that I don't want a police officer in the classroom. And we know it's been demonstrated that where police officers enter into community centers or are seen as part of the community, the kids will go to them because they see them as mentors.
Yeah.
They see them as individuals that are keeping their spaces safe. And so they'll see and I've seen this personally. I was with a police officer as Solicitor General walking in a neighborhood one day, and a young boy came over and said, "Hey, Pete, that car that's parked over there, it's been there for 3 days. Nobody in this neighborhood owns it. So you better look into why that car is there and who." That's when you start to know that the system is starting to work in an appropriate way. You move that over to corrections. So our justice systems, the courtrooms are filled with individuals, not that have come to the courtroom for the first time. I was sitting in a courtroom one day, and I'm looking at the judge, and he's talking to the accused like they were best friends. And afterwards, I asked the judge, "How often do you see him?" And he says to me, "Oh, he's in here every week. He's been coming in for the last 5 years." Now, he sees that as something positive because he's able to manage that individual. But the underlying question is, why is he coming here?
Yeah.
And what can we do to make sure that he doesn't come here by giving him the appropriate supports elsewhere? And you work to corrections and you go there. I mean, we call it corrections. And I remember as minister, I got into trouble for this, but it's never stopped me from asking the question. So I said, what exactly do we correct in corrections? And, they're all looking around the room at each other. I said, okay, from now on, I'm the Minister of Community Safety and Warehousing, because that's what we do. We warehouse people. How are we fixing a problem by simply allowing someone to stay for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, if we're not actually providing them the supports and services to rehabilitate? And what does that mean? It means providing them understanding why they're there, because in a lot of cases, they're there because of an underlying mental health or an addiction issue. Addressing those issues, and we've seen it. I've seen it work in Alberta. We developed a model here in Ontario that was adapted in Alberta, and they dropped the recidivism rates to 5%. So the individuals that went through the program for 6 months were then in a halfway house for another 6 months, and after 1 year, the recidivism rates, so repeat offending, dropped to 5%.
Yeah.
That is corrections.
Yes. Yeah. I had some experience when I worked at St. John's University in New York City with a program an agency that dealt with youth who were court referred. So they had multiple offenses, usually around drugs and committing crimes. And so this was kind of the last stop for them. And so if they didn't have this program, they were going into the judicial penal system, and they're learning, as my friends in clinical work said, they're learning how to become professional criminals. And what was so striking about this program was it was, obviously clinically based. It was residential, and they taught them. They had all sorts of treatment modalities, but interestingly, they had very high standards for them. So when you went into the room of a resident, every shirt was on a hanger. It was in the closet in the same way. Socks were folded up into a ball. And I remember I had brought some of the student athletes from St. John's University over to see this because they did some volunteer work there. And I wanted them to know the lives of these kids, right? Because they're in a really privileged position to be a Division I scholarship athlete, but they might not be so far removed from this, in terms of their own background and life circumstances. And I remember a young man, he was probably about 16 or 17, and we were talking about his recovery and the process. And he said, and I'm very nervous about going home this weekend to see my mother, because it's the first time I've seen her since I stole money out of her handbag for drugs. And I thought to myself, that is the level of awareness, right? That when you speak about mental health and the transformation, right, that inner transformation of cultivating that awareness around, being able to be aware of what happened, what you did, why you did it, admitting anxiety and acknowledging that and welcoming that. And I
that's part of the process. And it's interesting, that hierarchical structure really refers back to the fact that in the old days we had boundaries. You're expected to be home at a certain time, you were expected to do your homework, you were expected, and you had all these expectations put on you by adults, by your teachers, and over the course of time, what's happened is that those boundaries have disappeared. And so you have young people, even adults for that matter, that do what they want, when they want, however they want, and they don't really feel that they have to be accountable to anyone.
Yeah.
That is the beginning of the end.
Interesting.
And so when you have young people that are put into any type of program like that, I call those my studies led me to conclusions in terms of what those active ingredients are in a residential therapeutic community model. So what that means is people come into a program, they spend 24 months, and I am going to tell you how you're going to live those 2 years. And in those 2 years, usually in the first 6 months, is when you have all the pushback and because you're learning how to regulate your behaviors, how to regulate your thought processes, and you're being made responsible for yourself, but interestingly in a therapeutic community, for each other. And because of that hierarchical structure, there's always someone that knows more, is going to tell you what needs to be done. And that conditioning over the course of 2 years with these active ingredients really rehabilitates the individual and allows him to reintegrate into society. My work now is looking at those active ingredients and saying, why do I have to wait for the guy or the woman and by the way, there are more women now that are addicted than ever before, and it's actually to the point where there probably will be more women addicts than there are men. Physiologically, they're not able to handle the drugs the way men do. And as a result of that, there's many, many more women, which is really disturbing and troubling because many of them have children as well.
Yeah.
But utilize those active ingredients to reinforce good behavior, boundaries into the lives of young people. And that means, what does that, for me, that means educating clerics, making sure the priests and our imams and rabbis understand the important role they play in the formation, not just of the child, but the family. And then, what do we do with respect to our institutions, and how do we integrate these active ingredients into the family unit and into policing and into the medical system? Because if we did put them there, what we could do is increase our prevention. And again, why are systems established? Education and prevention. We've got to get back to our first principles as to why we came together as a society. It's, when you think about it, it's public safety, right? Together, we have a safer environment. How's that working out for us? Medical system, so that we have the best of the best looking after. How's that working out for us? And again, I don't know if this has to do with the work that I've done with Lean Six Sigma, but I look at the systems and I'm thinking to myself, they're all broken.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're broken intentionally. I think over the course of time, because they've been influenced perhaps by motivations that are more political than humane,
Yeah.
what we've done is we've allowed the systems to veer off the course. And so we need to spend less time politicizing decisions as they relate to the systems and spending more time looking for ways to make sure that they're all delivering the best level of services possible for people at the most efficient cost as well. Because again, you can't keep funding systems. Einstein's theory, right, of insanity. Keep doing the same thing over and over again, thinking you're going to get a different result. Kind of looks that way when you think of the amount of money we're spending on our systems, and we can't seem to still get it right. I think the problem is that you need to look at the underlying issues or the underlying reason why these systems exist in the first place, and start pulling it back to the center so that they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, educating, preventing, and in the most acute cases, whether it's tertiary care, whether it's our corrections system, whether it's our justice system, allow them to deal with the most acute of cases, not default everything to one place and hope that it works out.
Yeah. One of the things I was struck by was, you have an ecumenical heart. You really work across multiple religious faiths. When you speak about your work with ordained priests in the Catholic Church, ordained priests in other Catholic and Christian churches, imams, rabbis, lay ministers. And I was wondering about, I think you've probably thought a lot about this in your research around the role that general spirituality plays as a positive force in helping people in recovery and addiction and helping communities.
There cannot be recovery without a foundation in spirituality. Recovery is a process that starts with acknowledging that there's a problem and then learning methods to treat that problem, modalities of treatment that allow the individual to pull their lives back together. But that third element is the most important. And there have been a lot of studies that have been done that show that without spirituality, the recidivism rates are much, much higher. And so spirituality, and again, if I'm talking to Catholics, I'm going to tell the story because it's kind of cute, but I used to teach at Caritas. I used to do a class every Friday. And so I'd come in and I'd start talking about the martial arts. I have a 5th Dan black belt in Taekwondo. Wow. So the martial arts is a very secular way to talk about the Do of life, the art of living, without having to refer to any specific figures in Christianity or Judaism. And so I'd come in and I'd start talking about Jesus, not Jesus, but about the Master. And I'd use examples. And I remember one guy pulled me aside afterwards, hey, isn't that the section out of the Bible where Jesus did? And I said, okay, well, Jesus wore a dobak. I responded to him that, he was a martial artist. Why was he a martial artist? He was trying to attain the highest level possible as a human being. And what does that mean? What are the principles behind that? And so I kind of glossed over that piece. But when I was working with addicts, one of the things that they're always hesitant to talk about is institutions, whether it was the schools that they went to, the religion that they practiced. And so I thought, I got to take that religion component out of it, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to take the spirituality out of it. And a lot of these guys at the end of the day started picking up the Bible and started picking up books, the Quran. They would pick up the Torah. They would look at them, and because that was their background. They got pulled back to that. But it was when they were ready for it.
Yeah.
But before that, to try to associate to them the importance of things like trust and hope and respect and foundational principles that everyone has to have to be a good human being, to get them away from that arrogance and that self-love that they could do whatever they want and that they were completely autonomous and whatever they did had no impact on anyone else and no one should care about them. And so to move them away from that way of thinking to one where they started respecting themselves, respecting others. And usually it comes from learning to respect others, that eventually they learn to respect themselves. I relay a story all the time that I love also in terms of how people are influenced by their environment. I was working with a gentleman he was a convicted killer. And he came into the program as a condition to reducing the length of time that he had to spend in prison. So he came into the program and he had to stay there for 2 years. So if he didn't, he'd go back to prison. And he came in, and I could tell you for the first 6 months probably, he sat with his arms and legs folded, looking at the floor. And if I tried to acknowledge him or try to pull him into a conversation, he started with and ended with he was not a good person. He was not in a good place. One day I'm driving home. It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and my phone rings. And it was the farm where this gentleman along with 40 other men are living. And he's in a panic because a goat had just given birth to 2 baby goats. One was stillborn, and the second one couldn't latch onto the mother. And he's saying, what am I supposed to do with this goat? I said, well, look, I can't come there now. There isn't a pharmacy open. I'll go buy a baby bottle in the morning. I'll get some formula, and we'll get it going. And keep it in a blanket, and you stay with it, and just drip. Get a glove, heat up some milk, and just drip some milk into its mouth, and that way, just to sort of keep it going until tomorrow morning. When I hung up the phone, I thought that goat's a goner. By the time I get there, it's gonna be dead. Remember, this guy killed a human being, right? He's gonna look after a goat. Anyway, so I got there the next morning, and he was in the stall with the goat wrapped in a blanket with another guy, and they were dripping milk into the goat's mouth. They kept it alive.
Wow.
The goat's name was Oreo, and I brought the baby bottles, I brought the formula, and I said to him afterwards, I said, just what happened? Like, what made you want to look after it? He goes, I realized that without me, that goat was going to die. Like that doesn't sound significant to us because we've never killed anyone, but to kill someone and have that kind of a revelation, it's never too late, right?
Yeah.
And so he got it. And then, he started coming out of that shell. He started working around the farm and ran into him again another day. And I said, so, you seem to like coming out here and working with the animals, like hanging around here. And he goes, you know what? They're good. They're good for me. They don't judge me. And I thought to myself, wow, that is really powerful. When you think about the influences that this poor guy's had in his life to not feel that he can relate to another human being, and to now be eventually developing out of that and understanding that there is, connection between different forms of life. He eventually finished the program. He went off, he got married, and haven't heard from him, but the last I'd heard was he'd bought a house, had a full-time job, and got on with his life. And this is a man who'd killed someone. And so I stop and think, when I see situations like that, how many other people, given that opportunity, could have transformed their life? That's probably why I do what I do.
Yes.
I came to government not to do one-offs, and I had this conversation with the premier a few times where, give me the tools to change the system so I can do this for everybody. Doing it as a one-off, I'll do it, but it's extremely difficult to do, and at the end of the day, saving one person is just, is important. But if we could save a lot more because we could put the right policies in place, that would be a really good thing.
Yeah. And so, part of the vision, right, is to be able to sort of align the learnings from the inner healing to building the systems, and then really weaving and integrating policy into that, right?
Yeah. Well, it all starts with that. I mean, one of the things that I was taught, it was an indigenous elder that said to me, everything you need to heal is inside you. Everything you need to stay strong and be well is inside you. And he was talking about the three elements: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual.
Yeah.
And those three pieces, of the three, the most important is the spiritual. And when you think about how we live our lives, maybe you're different, but because you understand it and it's part of your preparation to think about the spiritual. But how many people unclog that filter to actually appreciate the relevance and the importance of spirituality in your life?
Yeah.
And if you don't unclog that filter, how many opportunities are being missed that are presented to you? God doesn't talk to you in the physical or in the mental. He talks to you in the spiritual.
Yeah.
And so how do you unclog that filter, and how do you keep it unclogged? Meditation.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, yoga, if you're so inclined, but meditation definitely gives you that opportunity to unclog that filter and allow you to see things. I used to always reference Senator Seneca. He used to always talk in 2BC. He said that luck is when opportunity meets preparation. But luck in Italian is fortuna. And fortuna is not luck, it's success. Mm-hmm. So a successful person sees opportunity as a result of preparation. So being educated, socializing with other individuals and learning from them unclogs the filter for you to see those opportunities. Yeah. And again, those opportunities are not for you, right? Success comes to you when you use those opportunities to help other people. And unlocking that and understanding that and seeing things from a spiritual perspective is what gives you the success, right? That's not luck, gives you that success.
Yeah. There was Father Ronald Rawheiser has a book that's probably 30 years old called The Holy Longing. And it's a book that many of my friends and colleagues who work in the addiction field, particularly chapter 2 in that book, on spirituality, rave about. And, as you know very well, some people in the field, both people who struggle and people who are clinicians, they may not have had a great experience of religion per se. And so, the interesting thing about his chapter on spirituality is he speaks about spirituality as uncovering the longing, the desires, the hopes, and the dreams, and allowing your spirituality, your life orientation, to shape and be shaped by that. And I think about what you're talking about as really, epitomizing that, right? That the core of spirituality, that however you would refer to it as divine energy or divine providence or, the universe, being able to bring that shaping, right, to those desires. And because when they're not shaped, they tend, right, to go off directions that, can be destructive.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. To be grateful for the things that we have, appreciating the people that are around us, understanding why things happen. I'm a firm believer, and I always ask myself this question. I don't know if that's part of the meditation process, but after I attend an event or I meet people at an event and I walk away from it, I go, now why did God want me to be here tonight, and why did I meet this person? I always ask myself that question. And it's interesting when you stop and you ask yourself that question, again, with a clear mind, you realize that God has put this person in your path or to walk with you because there's something that he needs you to do. I heard the expression, I really enjoyed it. God asks you for a loan, and he's not going to pay you back today, but the loan is your time. And when he asks you for it, he will reward you and pay you back. But right now, he's asking you for a loan. And what are you going to do? Are you going to give him that loan, or are you going to walk away from it because you think there's something more fruitful or more of a monetary reward for you or whatever? So you've got to sort of stop and analyze, why did this happen? And what's God asking me? He wants a loan from me. So what am I going to do? How am I going to give him what he needs? Because I know one day that reward is there. And the reward, again, could be in the next life, but it's also in this life. I mean, nothing gives you more of a dopamine fix, I think, than knowing that you've changed the life of someone or helped someone along. And even if it doesn't always work out, the gratitude that you get from a person that you've tried to help, that has listened to you, or that the fact that you've listened to them and give them the comfort that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten hadn't it been for you stopping and giving them that time.
Yeah. I just wanted to say how edified I am by your life commitment, your work. And I ask our podcast guests this as sort of a favor and advice, but Niagara University has been officially in the province for, over 40 years. Now we've been in the city of Vaughan for 5 years. What advice would you give to Niagara University in terms of being part of the solution as an higher educational institution, of being part of the solution on the work that you see that's so critical and essential?
Well, I think given the people that you're training, they in effect are the people that will train other people. And so I think it's really important for them to understand and continue the mission of delivering culturally safe, appropriate supports and services. Teachers that are prepared, that understand the needs of different people, that don't try to do those one brush stroke or the one size fits all approaches. I think it's really important that as we train people to be leaders and influence policy, that they don't forget that we need systems. Systems, when we talk about fidelity to systems, we can't always go back to first principles from 100 years ago, but they do evolve. But we need to set the boundaries in place. And so I think institutions of higher learning need to ensure that the people they're training are sensitive to the needs. I mean, we live in, this country, this province has 110 different cultures. Can you know all of them? No, but you can know that there are 110 different cultures. The work that we do from a spirituality standpoint, I believe the example is the most important way that we, impart knowledge on other people. The fact that, mentoring individuals, peer-to-peer support work, engaging in community activities. When I practiced law, every lawyer was required to do 10% pro bono work. And they used to say, well, that's going to interfere with my ability to earn. No, you're going to earn the same amount, but 10% of your time has to be documented as pro bono work. And the reason for that being is that with that education, with that higher learning, the access points to help individuals that would otherwise get that help need to be established. We need people doing that kind of work. And I think that's important. It's not always about the almighty dollar. It's also about the benefits that you get from helping other people in ways that are not necessarily tied to monetary compensation.
Yeah.
So I think that's what higher institutions of higher learning should do more of, and incorporate those types of programs that develop skill sets in individuals to be able to be leaders and policymakers, making good decisions that are not necessarily just going to go with the flow.
Yeah, amen to that. Minister Debola, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being our guest today.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.